Broadcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
How do you create better engagement with your employees at your organization? Then this episode is for you, because we're going to take it up a notch and we're going to talk about how do you not only engage them, but really create an environment where they're inspired. And I'm going to do that today with my guest, Stephen M.R. Covey. And we're going to talk about his latest book, Trust and Inspire: How Truly Great Leaders Unleash Greatness in Others. Stephen is certainly an authority in this area. His last book, The Speed of Trust, is a New York Times bestseller. He's also the CEO of Covey Link, as well as the CEO of Franklin Covey Global Trust Practice. On top of that, he's a Harvard MBA, and he's the former CEO of Covey Leadership Center, which under his stewardship became the largest leadership development company in the world. You're in the right place to learn about leadership. So let's get into it. Stephen, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I had an opportunity to read your book several weeks ago and thoroughly enjoyed it, and thought I couldn't wait to have you on this to really talk about trust and inspire. And I think in this time that we're in right now, it's so relevant.
Exactly. Well, first of all, thank you, Patrick. Delighted to be on your podcast. And I couldn't agree more. It's a new world of work and a new world of working. And a new world of working requires a new way of leading. We can't keep doing the old things. So we got to catch up our leadership with how work has changed.
Over the last 2.5 years, what have you seen as it relates to employees and leadership, that relationship, as it relates to the book?
What's interesting is I was working on this book for really the last 6 years. So I started prior to the pandemic, because this is where things were going. But the pandemic just kind of turbocharged everything. It accelerated everything. But things were moving in these directions where the nature of the world is clearly changing through technology. The nature of work is changing. It's more team-based, contextualized around service and interdependent, collaborative. But what really changed was the nature of the workplace. The idea of working from home, working from anywhere, hybrid work, remote work, intentionally flexible work, that we'd been trending that direction, and the pandemic just accelerated it dramatically. The workforce is changing. So many generations, as many as 5. Right. And then also coming out of the pandemic, just the choices, the options that people have has led to this great resignation as people have reflected and thought about things. And now they have choices and options. And suddenly they're saying, you know what? I want something different or something new. And so the world has changed. It accelerated coming out of the pandemic and really made the relevancy of this book even greater. I think it still would have been relevant. I just think it's so timely right now.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned about the Great Resignation, because we've heard so much about it recently, right? Especially back in the fourth quarter of last year about the number of people that are leaving their jobs. But what is interesting is you said you started this 6 years ago, that you were seeing these. And I have often said that the Great Resignation, the only thing new about the Great Resignation as I see it today is that people have physically been able to leave their organizations. But the Great Resignation mentally and emotionally has been going on for a decade, where people have left their organizations. They just physically didn't have the options that they have.
Absolutely. That's maybe the best definition of disengagement, is when people quit, but stay.
Yeah. Right.
They mentally, emotionally left,
Gone.
But physically they were there. They did the minimum. And the pandemic suddenly just added the physical piece to it, right? You're exactly right. That's the new thing about it. But this has been going on. Yeah. We're not tapping into people's greatest passions and creativity and talents. And now they suddenly have more choices and options on that. And so the physical is caught up now with the mental and emotional.
Without question, there's a quote that I will often use by Eric Hoffer, and it says, in times of change, learners inherit the earth while the learned find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. And I think we're in that space, right? If you're not a leader that is a learner right now, if you think that it's the way it was before, you're going to be left holding the bag. And I think your book speaks to that in terms of how things need to change.
Absolutely. There's just too much information, too much change, too much disruption. You can't know it all. The mindset. Carol Dweck, she's brilliant. The idea that know-it-all's irrelevant now. It's a learn-it-all. You got to be learning. And that's why your podcast is so significant, because leaders are learners. And we got to learn, and we got to be changing and shifting, including how we're leading.
So you talk about trust, inspire. I'd like to really sort of focus in on the inspire part. And reason being is I found it interesting. About 6 months ago, I was curious about this in terms of what do people think is more important? Is it to be engaged or is it to be inspired? And what was interesting is there were about 70 people that actually took the poll. So we're not talking about anything scientific here, but what was interesting is that there were about close to 70% of those that responded were CEOs or presidents. And the majority of them, 64%, felt that engaged was more valuable than inspiring. And I think it is part of that sort of old mindset maybe of what does it mean to be inspired versus engaged?
Yeah, I think that is probably reflective of the old mindset. But also I think we've been working on engagement for the last couple of decades. And it's been the holy grail, right? Yeah. And it's a good thing. We still want engagement. Inspiration, to become inspired, you go through engagement. So it's still on the path. If someone says, I'm focusing on engagement, I say, fabulous. That's wonderful. Let's move. Let's try to engage our team and our people. Engagement is a really good thing. And there's another frontier beyond engagement that is inspiration, that includes engagement. We won't become inspired without also achieving engagement, but there's something beyond it. But I think our paradigms are deeply scripted in engagement being the end all. And also maybe we're limited in how we view what inspired means. And that might be kind of reflected in that outcome.
Yeah. So along those lines, I was going to ask you, if you were to define engaged versus inspired, what is the difference for a leader? My guess is when people hear inspired, and it was interesting, some of the comments, there was sort of a fluffiness to it, right? To be inspired somehow doesn't seem to have that strength behind it. And I think it's the opposite, right? If you're inspired, you're even more beyond that. But I do think there's some of that mindset out there. It doesn't seem as strong as engaged.
Yeah. I think that mindset probably persists in many. And I think you're right. But again, this is not good and bad. They're both good. And so it's just inspired is also tapping into something bigger. But the engaged tends to work on its extrinsic. It's the carrot and stick mindset. It's motivation. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing. And you are tapping into that discretionary effort. And again, people are bringing out good things from them. But inspired adds to it a sense of connection through caring and belonging, that I'm connecting to this, but also a sense of connection around purpose and meaning and contribution, that my work matters and it makes a difference. And I feel connected in what I'm doing. And so it includes what I'm achieved with engaging. I'm giving that discretionary effort, but I also feel inspired by it because of how I feel on fire with what we're doing, the purpose and my overlap of purpose. I call it co-purposing, but I also feel inspired because I feel a sense of belonging on this team. And I feel a sense of caring from my leaders, not just that they're tapping into me as a human resource, but as a person. And I want both. I want to be tapped, my mind to be tapped into, but I also want to connect at a human level and have a sense of purpose and meaning and contribution. And that's intrinsic. It's internal. It's inside of people. And we're trying to light the fire that's within, but it's inside of people. And that fire can burn on for years when someone feels inspired versus constantly kind of providing more fodder, more carrots, more sticks to try to help move it along the way. So again, I view inspiration as the next frontier of engagement, just going to another level. And both good things, but one is going beyond. But I do think we need to shift the paradigm that this is just soft and fluffy.
I would agree. And when I hear you talk about belonging, That is so strong, right? When you think about organizations and people, when you feel like you belong to something, you don't want to leave that. And I look at that in terms of how do you deal with people not wanting to leave your organization? Pay might go a certain amount of it and other benefits. But when people feel that they belong, they're less likely to want to go to another place, even if the money is better, because they're like, I love it here. Like, I feel a connection here. I think that's so important.
It does. Remember the wonderful book Peter Senge wrote, Fifth Discipline, and that great quote that when people have been part of an extraordinary team, that they have that sense of connection, that sense of belonging and identity that flows from it, that they often spend the rest of their lives chasing, trying to recreate it and reestablish it because of what it does to them and for them. And it's because part of your identity that can be remarkable. It is powerful and really strong, that sense of belonging. And that's part of what inspires. Let me also say this, that this engagement, inspiring, during the pandemic and beyond, there's so many professions that have really had to work hard. I'm just thinking of healthcare professionals and teachers and others, and many people that are on the front lines that didn't have certain options because they had to be there physically and risk things and really working hard. And in some ways, it would be almost disingenuous to say that they're not fully engaged, even if they are not maybe as mentally creative and everything, because they're giving everything they have, in a sense, to do this. But someone could be fully engaged and yet completely uninspired. It's almost like you can't ask more from them, but they're not inspired. That fire within is not lit. It would be unfair. This quiet quitting, this idea that people need the boundaries in their lives, of work life. They're a whole person, and you can't almost ask for more. But again, someone could be fully engaged, but utterly uninspired. And so there's just another frontier when you get that caring, that belonging, and that sense of purpose and meaning and contribution can be a game changer.
You mentioned in the book one of the polls that looked at, I think, 16 different competencies. And you talk about that research. Could you go through that? Because I think that's so important when we think about what does the employee want?
Yes, absolutely. This comes from the Zanger Folkman consultancy firm. They do extraordinary work on, they probably have done more 360, the feedback instruments, maybe any firm out there. And they gather this data. And so they've got 16 competencies or attributes of leadership. So they asked the people being led, if you look at these 16 attributes of leadership, which one do you want the most from your leader? And the number one attribute that the people wanted from their leaders was a leader who inspires me, to be inspired from my leader. And they said it was not number one by a little amount, but it was clear in a way the front runner with not a close second, a leader that inspires. And then they asked, what are you getting from leadership of these 16 competencies? And it was at or near the bottom, that they're being inspired by their leaders. So it's what they want the most, and yet they're not getting it almost at all. The gap there is enormous. And so that's what people want, to be trusted and to be inspired. Another word for inspire it comes from the Latin word inspirare, to breathe life into. And the whole idea of trust and inspire, it breathes life into people. The old model, command and control, even the enlightened version of command and control, sucks the life out of. And so you want to breathe life into. And here's maybe another way of just engagement versus inspiration. On engagement, oftentimes I'm getting results through people and I'm engaging them, but people are often seen as a means to an end. Trust and inspiration is I'm getting results in a way that grows people. People are an end in and of themselves. I'm not taking down the importance of results. I'm just elevating the importance of growing people, and that they are an end by themselves apart from the results that they help create and produce, and just elevating this. And it's kind of, we've given lip service to it a lot, but we've got to catch up our leadership style to what our intent is.
Along those lines, I'm guessing there are leaders out there, and you mentioned this in the book, of the confusion of people thinking that to be inspiring means you have to be charismatic. And I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yes, I think that maybe sometimes we conflate the words, right? of charisma and inspiration and think, gosh, if I'm going to be inspiring, I got to be really charismatic. And that's just not me. But if you think about it, that you're like me and that our listeners are like me. I know some people who are charismatic, but who I would not define as inspiring. I know a few other people who nobody would describe as charismatic, but who are extraordinarily inspiring because of who they are, because of how they connect, because of their caring and their compassion, their empathy. It's almost a superpower that they have, and how they also connect to purpose and to meaning and contribution. They're very inspiring. So they're not the same, charisma and inspiration. Let's separate those. And the point is, inspiring others is a learnable skill for us as leaders. Everyone can inspire. It's the kind of leadership we need today. And we want leaders who inspire, and it's learnable as a skill, as a competency. That's a paradigm shift. It's not just for the charismatic. It's a learnable skill. Everyone can inspire.
If you were to think of that from a standpoint of anybody can inspire, are there things that you would say as a leader, these are probably the most important things to work on to create that inspiration?
Yes. I would say 3 things, 3 tips. And there's more than this, of course. First, become inspired yourself. It's like the airline metaphor, right? Put your own mask on first before helping others. If you want to inspire others, become inspired yourself. You get your own light burning, your own candle going. When your candle's lit, that can light a lot of other candles. If you're not lit, it's hard to light other candles to inspire others. So first, find your why. Become inspired yourself so that you can help ignite that in others and light those candles. That's maybe the first tip I would give. And so then that's all about finding your why, your purpose, your sense of purpose, meaning, contribution for yourself. Second would be connect with people. And I think you do that at the relationship level through caring, like I said earlier, and at the team level through belonging, like we've been discussing, and inclusion. So caring and belonging. And I'll give just a quick illustration of this is Indra Nooyi, former CEO of PepsiCo.
Yeah,
Long story made short, she used to write letters to the parents of her leadership team, thanking them for the gift of their child to her company because of how remarkable their child was. And those parents loved receiving these letters. Thank you for raising such a fabulous daughter who is so vital to our team and to our organization. How she does these things, I attribute that to you for raising such a remarkable child. And it just created this sense of belonging and caring that Indra cares. And the parents were thrilled. The leader, the executive was thrilled. It was not done as a technique. It was done genuine caring because Indra experienced it herself when she had gone to India and with her mother. Her father had passed away. She just became the CEO of PepsiCo. And all these people came to see not Indra, but Indra's mother. And they would praise the mothers. And Indra was right there with her saying, wow, you raised such a remarkable child. And Indra said, they didn't say a word to me. They just went up to my mom saying, you are amazing for raising such a remarkable child. Indra didn't care that they didn't compliment her. She was thrilled that they complimented her mother. And she thought, I should do the same thing for the parents of my leaders, for the gift of their child to our company. She did that, but it just inspired everybody. So that the second tip is connect with people through caring and belonging. Then the third key tip would be this: connect people to purpose and to meaning and to contribution, to why it matters, to significance. And the premise is that you can create and embed purpose, meaning, and contribution into almost any role, into almost any organization. And getting good at this, finding ways to co-purpose, to overlap purpose matters. And I think of just one little illustration, Pepperdine University, Graziano School of Business. I just was out there, great organization, great leadership. The purpose of their business school, they say it this way: our purpose is not to produce leaders who are best in the world. Our purpose is to produce leaders who are best for the world, best for the world leaders. Now, if you're a professor there, staff member, a janitor, and someone asks, what are you about? Producing best for the world leaders. Wow. Talk about connecting to purpose. That inspires.
Yeah. That's such a great point, too, in terms of organizations, regardless of where you are in the organization, too, because I remember years ago working with a group. One of the people in the group was an accounts receivable individual and didn't really see the value in what they did in terms of how they contributed. Yet when we talked this through, that if they didn't do what they were doing in terms of accounts receivable, in terms of collecting money to bring back in, this organization could not reach its mission of being a world-class organization because they wouldn't have the money to do research and development. They wouldn't be able to buy more materials to develop more products. You could see that it did change her attitude toward this, is that there was she played a role in this company's success. And again, I think in healthcare, especially, you look at housekeeping as being such an important component to the success of a healthcare organization from the standpoint of reducing germs and infections.
Absolutely, which is still where people get infected going to the hospital.
I know.
Through germs and infections. So think of that critical role of housekeeping, often overlooked. And you might think I'm just a housekeeper. No, I'm creating wellness. Yeah. I'm getting rid of disease. I'm doing all these things to have that overlap of the role, of the contribution that it makes.
Yeah. And it does require a leader that's able to bring that out in an individual to see that they do play an important role.
Right. They need to be intentional about it. You can't just assume it. Because what's interesting is that still some of the professions that have the biggest disengagement are in professions that have such a noble purpose. Yeah. I'll just use teaching as an example. Think of teachers, talk about where there's been a great resignation and an exodus of teachers. But what they do, they're developing the minds and the character of students, of our children. The work they do matters, and yet they're so beat up, so underappreciated. They feel so disrespected, so undervalued. They're in the crosshairs of our society, of politics and everything, and it just beats out the sense of inspiration. So they're completely engaged, but utterly uninspired, and yet they're in a profession that is inspiring. Isn't that ironic? We have to work hard to make the connections, but they need to feel it from their own leaders. And too often there's command and control leadership in teaching. And if the teachers feel that way, then it's hard for them to feel trusted and inspired. It's hard for them to feel that inspiration as they go to do their work.
Yeah. You go on to talk about this stewardship model and 5 components of that. Could you talk about that?
Yes. So the stewardship model starts with the mindset. We always start with paradigms and how you see it, because it's see, do, get. And if your paradigm is inaccurate, then you'll do a different thing and you'll get a good result. But if you have a more complete, more accurate paradigm or mental map of people and of leadership, you'll do different things and you'll get better outcomes. So how do we see people? The first fundamental belief is that I believe that people have greatness inside of them. So my job as a leader is to unleash their potential, not to control them. Another belief about people, I believe that people are whole people, meaning body, heart, mind, spirit. They bring their whole self to work. They're not just economic beings. So my job as a leader is to inspire, not merely motivate. If they were merely economic beings, motivation's sufficient. They're human beings, whole people. Inspiration's better. So that's how I view people. Great potential, whole people. How do I view leadership? I believe that there's enough for everyone, an abundance mentality. So my job as a leader, I elevate caring above competing. Yes, let's compete in the marketplace, but let's care and collaborate in the workplace. And scarcity might be good economic theory, but scarcity is lousy leadership theory. Abundance is far better. And here's another one. I believe that leadership is stewardship. It's not about your rights. It's about responsibilities. Stewardship is a job with a trust. As a leader, we have a job with a trust for those that were in our stewardship that we're leading. And so therefore, I put service above self-interest. And finally, I believe that enduring influence is created from the inside out. So my job as a leader is to go first. Someone needs to go first. Leaders go first. It's inside out, and I go first. I model. That's collectively, that's a more complete, more accurate, more relevant paradigm or map of people and of leadership. And the map is not the territory. Too often we have limited maps. A command and control map is limited. It's reflected as maybe some people have greatness inside of them, my high potentials. But I've already labeled everyone else. But this is a growth mindset. Again, Carol Dweck.
Yeah.
It's how Satya Nadella turned around Microsoft. He revitalized, I shouldn't say turned around. He revitalized Microsoft. They were seen as having had their best days. And he comes in, breathes life into them. He's a trust inspired leader. He models, he trusts, he inspires. But it all started with the belief in a growth mindset, not just for you as a leader, but for your people, for everyone. And he would challenge his leaders that said, well, I've got some people on my team who don't have a growth mindset. And he'd say, that's on you. Help them come to see it in themselves. That's an act of leadership. And having that growth mindset of believing in the greatness and potential in everyone helped unleash the capabilities, the talents of Microsoft. And they've been revitalized they're winning in the workplace with their own workforce. It's a cool place to work again. They're winning in the marketplace. They're relevant. They collaborate. They innovate. And their stock price, I think, has gone from 34 to 275, approximately under his leadership. So a revitalization through his leadership style, starting with that paradigm that a growth mindset, that people have greatness inside of them.
The last one that you mentioned, I really appreciate this, you going first. And I think of a couple different things, right? I think you may mention in the book is around Brené Brown, around vulnerability. And I do think as a leader, there's an intentional vulnerability that you need to have in terms of being able to maybe say, I don't know, I was wrong, I'm sorry. I think of those things as going first. I think it comes back around and plays into a sense of belonging or psychological safety, where if I'm part of this group and I see the leader is able to say, I don't have the answer here, or I'm sorry, or many of those things that I'm afraid to do as an employee, it makes me feel as though I can do it too here.
Absolutely, Patrick. It's you, by going first, especially in those hard things. By say hard things, in the soft things that are hard to do, by displaying vulnerability. I don't know the answer to that. Let's find the answer. That's why I need you to help me find the answer. That's why I've got even more talented people on my team to have that sense of vulnerability. Think of the word intimacy, but spell it into me, C, I-N-T-O, me, M-E-S-E-E. So I let people see into me. I'm not trying to put on airs or fronts. It's to be rather than to seem. I let people see into me. And like Brené Brown says, you might have boundaries. Vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. But if you go first as a leader who's vulnerable, you do model it for others, but you make it safe, psychological safety for them to be real as well. But also people respond to it. They want authentic leaders. They want vulnerable leaders that model and make it safe for them to do the same.
Right. And what you mentioned there about the boundaries is, when I bring this up, I would jokingly say that you don't want that leader that every day comes in saying, I don't know where we're going again. I made another mistake, right? That doesn't inspire us anymore.
That doesn't inspire. Us. Yeah. But you want the leader that also is a model of character and competence.
Yeah, totally.
And they're good at their job, but they don't have to be the perfection of all these things.
Right. Totally.
It's got boundaries.
Totally. So along those lines, we've spent so much time on the inspiring part. I do think that last piece of it really wraps us into trust. If I've got that leader that does these things, it's created an environment of trust. And you speak about trust in a different way. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the leadership is around, how do I create an environment where people trust me? But that's not really what you're talking about on trust. So I'm hoping you can talk about that. What does it mean?
Yeah. Well, here's kind of one way to think about it. You could have two trustworthy people working together, and yet no trust between them, even though they're both trustworthy, if neither person is willing to extend trust to the other. And so I'm just really highlighting that, yes, to have trust, the outcome, which is what we want, a high trust team, high trust culture, high trust relationship, be trusted as a leader. Yes, you have to be trustworthy. Trust is earned, but you also have to be trusting. Trust is given. And I think in that equation of trustworthy times trusting equals trust, I think the bigger gap in most organizations today, in most leadership scenarios, is that we're not trusting enough as leaders. And it's not so much that we have untrustworthy people and we're untrustworthy. We need to unleash and create the trust by extending more trust, giving more trust, becoming more trusting. That's why trusting is a stewardship. And in the trust and inspire, those are verbs, not nouns. Otherwise, it would be trust and inspiration. It's trust and inspire. Trust others, inspire others. Those are verbs. Become more trusting. So you model, you trust, and you inspire. We need to become more trusting as leaders. We got to give it to get it. Because when we trust others, they tend to trust us back.
Right.
When we withhold the trust, guess what? They tend to not trust us either.
Right. That really hit me because I was thinking, well, you talk about command and control. Well, I can be trustworthy in a command and control. Like what what I say and what I do is going to be the same thing. You can trust me.
Thing.
But if I'm command and control, to give trust to somebody else can be very difficult for me to do.
Really difficult because there's a great illustration. Trustworthy without necessarily being trusting. And because I might be afraid of losing control. I might be afraid, what if it doesn't work? What if they do it differently? And especially, again, I'm assuming positive intent that leaders, they want good outcomes. They care. It matters. And they want to make sure we deliver. But letting go, learning how to let go, but learning how to do it in a way where you also still have control without being controlling, but you do it through the agreement you set up, through expectations, through accountability, set up in an agreement. When people are working from home, it's not just do your thing. It's here's expectations and accountability about what we're trusting you to do. So it's a smart trust, not a blind trust. Low expectations doesn't inspire anyone. High expectations do with accountability built in. But yes, we need to become more trusting. That's probably in the Trust Inspire model, Trust Inspire, that might be our biggest gap, becoming more trusting as leaders.
And especially as we enter this world of remote work. And again, I think it is difficult, right? Because you don't see people on a day-to-day basis. Are they doing what they said they're going to do? There is a trust level here that needs to be overcome. And as I thought of the trust component, I think of things like Pygmalion. What you expect of somebody, you generally get. And if I think you're going to not do this the right way, I'm probably not going to be disappointed with my thoughts are because I've presented this in a way to you that I don't believe that you can work from home.
Absolutely. There is a clear Pygmalion effect. People tend to rise to the level of trust given or withheld, or go down to the level that they're not given. And the quickest way it was Henry Stimson that said, the quickest way to make someone trustworthy is to trust them. And the quickest way to make them untrustworthy is to not trust them and tell them that you don't. And then they tend to live down to that, especially with kids in our homes as parents. I saw one time a father and a son, and they were struggling in their relationship, and it's hard for all of us. And the son didn't deliver, and the father said, "Why are you behaving this way?" And the son said, "Because, Dad, that's the way untrustworthy kids behave." And the father had kind of labeled the kid as, "You're not trustworthy." And the kid was living down to that label. And the idea of seeing the potential and treating people according to their potential, not just their behavior, and tending to rise up to it, to be trusted, is the most inspiring form of human motivation. It brings out the best in people. They want to live up to the trust being given, and they want to rise to the occasion. There might be a few that abuse it, but they're the minority.
Totally.
Don't let the 5% you can't trust define the 95% who you can. It's far better to build our team and culture around the people that can be trusted and let the culture weed out, crowd out the offenders, the violators, versus penalizing the many because of the few.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we need to become more trusting as leaders. I think that is one of the great opportunities. When you model, when you trust, when you inspire, that's a different kind of leadership. That's what's needed today.
There's a quote by Einstein, I'm guessing you've heard this as well, is that everybody is a genius. But if you treat a bird based on its ability or judge a bird based on its ability to climb a tree, it will always think it's stupid. When that's not our thing and we're evaluated on something that's not normally what we do, a bird can fly into a tree but not climb it. It doesn't work, or something along those lines.
Right. Yeah. A similar expression is every child's a genius. They're then just de-geniusized by adults. And Westminster Fuller is the one that said that. We distrust and we show our distrust. And it's amazing. I'll just give you a little quick anecdote I heard today. This was a superintendent of schools, and we did a session on Trust and Inspire with her team. She had an assistant principal of one of her schools that came out of the military, traditional command and control to the nth degree, but his intent was good. He wanted everything to go perfect, go well. And they were going to have this big outside group come in. And so someone from the custodial staff came to him that morning and said, hey, we got this group coming in. You want to look at the way I'm arranging the chairs to make sure we get it the way you want exactly? Because, he's always was very command and control. He micromanaged everything, but he'd just gone through this training and was really kind of moved. And he said, you know what, Jose, I trust you. I trust you. We've done these events. You know what to do. You know what's best. I trust however you set it up is going to be the best way to do this. In the moment, Jose actually was moved to tears. He never felt this. And he said, I will come through for you. And he went and he gave his all and his care and his concern, and he set it up beautifully. And this leader began to reflect back on, wow, just this little simple act of extending trust to someone, what it does to them. It brings out the very best in people. We all like to be trusted.
Without question.
We all perform better.
Stephen, I've enjoyed this conversation so much. As I mentioned, your book, I think, is something every leader should add to their library, because I think it has so much relevance as we navigate the new environment we're going into. As we part ways here, any recommendations or suggestions you would have for that leader that might be listening and isn't sure what's the next step they can take to do this?
Yeah, I would come back to the point you highlighted. Go first. Don't wait on others. Leaders go first. Someone needs to go first. Be the first to be transparent in a culture of hidden agendas. Be the first to talk straight in a culture where everyone's spinning. Be the first to be respectful in a culture where people don't feel respected. Be the first to show that vulnerability where people are afraid to be authentic and vulnerable. And be the first to extend trust in a culture where maybe there's not enough trust extended and given. Model it. Someone needs to go first. Leaders go first. When you're a model, you can become a mentor. And today we need models and mentors. We need to look to leaders to say, look, we've got plenty of command and control models. We need trust and inspire models. And you can go first, no matter your role, whether you're in a line leadership position, a staff one, or whether you're just a team member. You're not just, if you're a team member and you're not in a formal leadership position, you still can go first. And in a sense, provide leadership to the entire team through your modeling. So we don't need to wait on anyone. We are empowered. We can go first. Just go first. Model, trust, inspire. Go first. And that's what we need. And then watch what happens. Watch the ripple effect. It can be profound.
Thank you so much for that. Again, I wish you all the best. I think this book has so much to offer. I'm glad that I had an opportunity to share it with others.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Wonderful to be on your show. Love the whole idea of learning from leaders. And I hope that our leaders can learn from this idea of trust and inspire leaders. You being them, our listeners, are the kind of leadership that is needed today. Thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Stephen M.R. Covey and that it's inspired you to pick up his book, Trust and Inspire. So many pearls in here, so many things to unpack in terms of how we look at inspiration, how we inspire, and what does it mean around trust? Not only to earn trust, but to give trust to others. So important. And again, so many valuable lessons in here that I think as learners, we have an opportunity to build better bridges with those that follow us. Thank you so much for taking an opportunity to listen to this episode. And I challenge you all to continue to rise above your best. Peace.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.